My teacher refused to lock down during a real school shooting, even blocked the light switch while gunshots got closer. When I begged her to let us hide, she said, "Sit down or you're expelled." I just stared at her. That was 1 year ago. Last week, she was led out of her apartment in handcuffs. I was in Miss Brown's AP history class when the lockdown announcement blared over the intercom, staticky and urgent. Lockdown, lockdown, this is not a drill. He had practiced this routine countless times since kindergarten. Lights off, hide in the corner, stay quiet. It was simple. Everyone began to move automatically, but Miss Brown stepped in front of us with that particular look she reserved for anyone who challenged her authority. "Get back to your desks now," she commanded, her voice sharp and final. I didn't approve any lockdown drill today. Out of habit, I raised my hand. "But Miss Brown, we're supposed to. The only procedures you follow are mine," she interrupted. "Sit down or you're all getting zeros on your presentations." And she launched into her familiar speech about her 25 years of teaching, about respect, and how her generation never needed constant handholding. The thing about Miss Brown was her strange priorities. She was excessively strict about minor infractions, like marking you absent for being 30 seconds late, yet remarkably lax about actual teaching, handing out A's on essays she clearly hadn't read. Once, as an experiment, I submitted a paper with an entire paragraph about SpongeBob in the middle. I received a 98. So, most of us reluctantly returned to our seats. No one wanted to jeopardize their GPA over what was probably just another drill. Then the announcement repeated. "Code red. This is a code red. All staff and students follow lockdown procedures immediately." That never happens during drills, they only announce it once. My stomach clenched with a sick, flipping sensation, the same feeling I get before a major test I haven't studied for, but infinitely worse. I kept glancing at the door. The hallway remained brightly lit, fluorescent lights blazing. During drills, teachers always kill the lights immediately. And I heard it, popping sounds like firecrackers, but not. Every phone in the room began buzzing at once. I pulled mine out from under my desk. My boyfriend Tyler was in chemistry 2 halls over. His text froze my blood, hiding in supply closet. "Someone has a gun. Where are you?" More messages flooded in from others, behind a filing cabinet in the main office under Mr. Garcia's desk. I showed Miss Brown my phone. "My boyfriend says there's someone with a—" "I see what's happening here," she cut me off. "You think you can stage some elaborate prank to get me in trouble, get me fired?" The popping sounds grew louder, closer. Someone screamed in the hallway, not a playful scream, but one of raw terror. "That's probably drama class practicing," Miss Brown said, though she didn't sound convinced anymore. I could see Mr. Peterson's classroom across the hall. Lights off. No movement. Just darkness where 20 kids should have been. My hands shook so violently I could barely type. "Brown won't let us hide. Still at desks." Tyler replied instantly. "What? Get to safety now." And tried next. Gentle Ben, who never argued with anyone. "Miss Brown, please, this feels real." "Feelings aren't facts, Ben, sit down." More running echoed in the hallway, lots of feet fleeing in the same direction, away from something. The intercom crackled again, but cut off mid-word. That's when we heard the shots. Not pops anymore. Bang, 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 like someone slamming a heavy metal door, but sharper, louder, undeniably real. I stood up. "We need to hide now." "Sit down or you're expelled," she repeated, moving to block the light switch. "I will not lose my job because you children want to play games." Thing inside me shattered. "I don't care." I sprinted for the lights. Chaos erupted. Half the class rushed to the designated safe corner. The other half remained frozen at their desks, torn between a lifetime of obedience and a primal voice screaming danger. Miss Brown grabbed for my arm as I passed, but I yanked away. She yelled about disrespect and consequences. "You're all being hysterical. This paranoia is exactly what social media has done to you. Manufactured fear." But we were no longer listening. Desks scraped across the linoleum as we barricaded the door. Someone cried. Someone prayed. The frozen students finally scrambled over, cramming into our corner, 23 teenagers trying to become invisible. Everyone except Miss Brown. She stood at her desk, arms crossed, fury radiating from her. The doorknob rattled. Everyone stopped breathing. The handle turned, but the door was locked. Thank God it was locked. A shadow passed beneath the door, paused. We could hear breathing on the other side, or perhaps it was just my own heart pounding in my ears. Footsteps moved on. Those were the longest 10 seconds of my life. A SWAT team found us 40 minutes later. Miss Brown was still insisting we had overreacted to a simple drill. Week later, we learned the shooter's identity. Jake Wilson from my sophomore English class, the quiet kid who sat in the back corner, sketching anime characters in his notebook. A paramedic wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm as I sat on a gurney outside. My whole body trembled as if I had hypothermia, even though it was May. She kept checking my pulse and asking if I could breathe, but all I could think about was Jake walking past our door. Jake with a gun. Jake, whom I'd lent a pencil to just last week. Detective Santos arrived with her badge and notebook, crouching to my eye level as she asked me to walk through everything that happened in Miss Brown's room. I told her about the announcement, about being forced to stay at our desks, about the sounds growing closer. She wrote everything down, nodding when I mentioned turning off the lights myself. The parking lot was chaos, parents running everywhere, news vans setting up, ambulances speeding away with sirens wailing. My mom crashed through the police tape, still in her hospital scrubs, mascara streaking her face as she hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. She kept touching my face and arms, checking for invisible injuries while demanding answers from Detective Santos about how a teacher could leave children exposed during an active shooter situation. Tyler's mom was there too, crying and hugging him repeatedly as he stood there, shell-shocked. Detective Santos led me to a quieter spot and showed me screenshots on her tablet of my text to Tyler about Miss Brown not letting us hide. She said 23 students had already given identical accounts, that Miss Brown kept insisting it was a hoax even after the gunshots started. 2 kids died in the math hallway, she told me quietly. 3 more are in the hospital, all from rooms that followed protocol immediately, except for 1 girl grazed by a bullet through a door. My dad showed up and silently led me to his truck. The radio stayed off the entire drive home, and we both flinched when a motorcycle roared past us at a red light. Our house felt strangely wrong, too normal with its familiar sense of coffee and laundry detergent. Dad made spaghetti, but I just pushed it around my plate while my phone buzzed incessantly with messages from everyone asking why Miss Brown hadn't let us hide. That night, sleep was impossible. I kept reliving those 40 minutes on a loop. Next morning, an automated call from the district's stated school was canceled indefinitely, and counselors would be available at the community center. Mom called in sick to stay with me, but I locked my bedroom door and sat on my bed, thinking about how we had almost stayed at our desks as she demanded. Channel 8 featured our school on every commercial break. Then Miss Brown's face filled the screen, standing in her driveway, telling a reporter she had maintained control during chaos and her students were alive because she didn't panic. Mom snatched the remote and threw it so hard it cracked the TV screen. Tyler sent me a link to a cell phone video from Mr. Peterson's dark classroom, showing everyone hidden and silent while Miss Brown's voice carried through the walls, talking about manufactured fear. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m., exactly when she was blocking the light switch. The video had 50,000 views in 2 hours, and the comments were brutal. I spent the next day in my room, jumping at every creak of the house or slam of a car door. Mom brought soup I didn't touch, and the group chat buzzed with talk of lawyers and lawsuits, but I couldn't focus. Principal Foster called that evening with his careful, official voice, saying the district needed my written statement about Miss Brown's actions, separate from the police investigation. Mom grabbed the phone and told him I'd provide it through our attorney, news to me, as I didn't know we had one. The next morning, Ben's mom drove him over because he needed to talk to someone who was there, someone who understood. We sat on my front porch, and he kept starting sentences he couldn't finish, about almost staying in his seat, about what would have happened if I hadn't turned off those lights. His hands shook just like mine. Tyler's parents dropped him off that afternoon, and we went to the backyard under the big oak tree. He rolled up his jeans to show dark purple bruises covering both knees from wedging himself behind chemical storage shelves in that supply closet. His voice was flat as he described the shots growing closer, knowing I was 2 halls away, but powerless to help. We sat for an hour, not really talking about it, yet unable to talk about anything else, while his fingers picked at the splintered wood of the picnic table. Day 5 began with Mom on the phone scheduling appointments. By noon, she had on Rebecca Thompson, a lawyer specializing in school safety cases. Her downtown office walls were covered in newspaper clippings about negligence lawsuits and safety violations across the state. Rebecca reviewed Mom's notes and stated, what Miss Brown did went beyond poor judgment. Keeping students exposed during an active shooter situation was criminal endangerment. She explained how other families were already filing civil suits, but criminal charges would be up to the district attorney. Community meeting on day 6 descended into chaos the moment Miss Brown walked through the Civic Center doors with her union representative. Parents began screaming immediately. She stood there with that same controlled expression she'd had during the shooting, repeating that she defollowed her professional judgment. Someone threw a water bottle that hit the wall behind her, and security guards had to form a circle to escort her back outside. That same night, Detective Santos called with a question that chilled me. Had Miss Brown ever mentioned Jake Wilson in class? He had been her student 3 years prior. At 7, I finally showered and changed out of the clothes I'd worn for days. Dad stood at the stove making pancakes like any other Sunday, but we both jumped when the doorbell rang, just a delivery guy. That split-second panic was becoming our new normal. That evening, the news finally confirmed what everyone already knew, showing Jake's yearbook photo. The anchor dropped the real bombshell. Wilson had filed a formal complaint against teacher Patricia Brown 3 years ago for psychological abuse. Mom immediately called our lawyer, while Dad scoured online records, finding a school board meeting transcript from 2021 mentioning a sealed student complaint against staff with dates that matched perfectly, though Miss Brown's name wasn't listed. At 8, Tyler picked me up and we drove to an empty mall parking lot, sitting with the engine off. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. She knew, he finally said. She had to know it might be him, and she still kept us all exposed. Ben started texting our class group chat with information his parents had found. 3 other students from Jake's graduating class remembered Miss Brown having it out for him. A girl named Melissa said Miss Brown had failed Jake on a technicality that almost cost him his graduation. The stories painted a clear pattern of targeting cert students. A9 Detective Santos arrived at our house with a court order for Miss Brown's personnel file. She told Mom they'd found something. Jake wasn't the only complaint. There were 6 others, all sealed and resolved without action. She needed my detailed statement about Miss Brown's exact words during the lockdown. I sat at the kitchen table with a blank statement form, my pen hovering. The first line asked for a description of events. I wrote 3 words, crossed them out, started again. How do you capture the tone of someone so entrenched in authority they cannot fathom being wrong? I finally wrote exactly what she said and did, step by step. No opinions, just facts. A10, a news alert buzzed on my phone during breakfast. The school board had placed Miss Brown on administrative leave pending investigation. The teachers' union statement beneath called it a rush to judgment against a dedicated educator with 25 years of service. The comment section already had 300 posts, half calling her a hero, half demanding her arrest. Mom shut my laptop and told me to stop reading, but I'd already seen my name mentioned 14 times. At afternoon, Principal Foster came to our door looking exhausted. He sat on our couch, staring at his hands as he told Mom about the complaints over the years, parents saying Miss Brown was too rigid, too harsh. But she had tenure and her students got good test scores, so nothing ever happened. His voice cracked when he mentioned the 2 kids who didn't make it out. Day 11 started with my phone exploding at 6:00 a.m. Someone had leaked Jake's manifesto to a news site before the FBI could lock it down. 3 pages detailed his fixation on Miss Brown, how she failed his senior thesis over a missing footnote, how that grade kept him from his dream college, how she laughed when he asked to fix it. The specifics were horrifying: dates, times, secretly recorded conversations building his case for why she deserved what was coming. Our lawyer, Rebecca, called an emergency meeting that night with all 23 families crammed into a Holiday Inn conference room. She stood at the front with a stack of papers and revealed the school district had known about Jake's fixation because his therapist had sent a warning 2 months before the shooting. The room erupted with parents shouting, crying, and demanding answers as Rebecca explained mandatory reporting laws and liability. Day 12, I woke to 47 Instagram notifications. Miss Brown had gone on a podcast called Truth in Education, spending an hour painting herself as a victim of woke culture and teenage hysteria. She used my full name, called me a troubled student with attendance issues, twisted my grandmother's funeral into me skipping class for fun. The host agreed, saying kids today are soft. Rebecca filed a cease and desist within 2 hours, but the episode had already been downloaded 12,000 times. My Instagram flooded with strangers calling me a liar, an attention seeker, a crisis actor. Someone found Mom's work number and began calling the nurses' station, asking if she was proud of raising a daughter who destroys teachers' lives. Day 13, Tyler came over with his sleeping bag and camped on my bedroom floor because neither of us could bear being alone. We lay awake in the dark at 3:00 a.m., staring at nothing. He kept revisiting that day, wondering if he could have pulled the fire alarm from the chemistry room to evacuate everyone before Jake started. The what-ifs were consuming us. Next morning, Miss Brown's husband started a GoFundMe for her legal defense, hitting $30,000 in 6 hours. The description called it a witch hunt, including photos of her at graduations with successful former students, carefully omitting anyone who didn't fit the narrative. People from 3 states away donated, leaving comments about liberals destroying education. Day 14, Ben's mom called, voice shaking, to say they were withdrawing from the group legal action. Ben's dad's construction company had just lost 3 major contracts with no explanation. Everyone knew Miss Brown's brother-in-law ran the biggest development firm in town and golfed with half the city council. At afternoon, Daniel Harris from my grade found me at a coffee shop, his phone trembling in his hand. He'd been hiding in the main office during the shooting and had recorded everything on his phone. The grainy video clearly showed Miss Brown walking down the hallway 30 seconds after the first shots, not running, not ducking, just strolling as if it were a normal passing period, while Mr. Peterson's door was already barricaded and Mrs. Garcia had her kids under desks. Daniel forwarded it to Detective Santos right there at the table. Day 15, I returned to therapy for the first time since my parents' divorce. Dr. Patel's office had the same fake plants and beige walls. I told her about the shadow under the door and still hearing Miss Brown call us hysterical while people died down the hall. She asked me to describe what I felt in my body when I remembered it. Daniel's video hit Twitter before dinner, and by midnight Brownew was trending with 40,000 retweets. People zoomed in, showing her checking her phone while other teachers dragged kids to safety, the timestamp clear. News vans descended on Daniel's house, and his parents had to take him to stay with his aunt in Boston. Day 16, Detective Santos had me review the footage with a state specialist who pointed out Miss Brown showed no startle response to the gunshots, just calm, deliberate walking. They were building a case for willful endangerment, which could mean up to 5 years in prison. Mom picked me up and drove straight to the district office to pull me out for homeschooling. Miss Brown walking calmly down the hall while other teachers barricaded doors is the kind of detail that makes lawyers rub their hands together, she said. She took 3 weeks of saved vacation time, telling me she didn't care about college applications right now. She cared about me being alive. We both ended up crying in the kitchen while pasta boiled over on the stove. Day 17, Miss Brown's lawyer held a press conference on the courthouse steps with 3 former students in suits behind him when a state senator who talked about rushing to judgment. The lawyer claimed the video was doctored and demanded independent analysis. Tyler's parents didn't wait. They transferred him to St. Mary's private school that same day. He texted me constantly, feeling guilty, but I told him to go. Our phones became a lifeline, both of us waking at 3:00 a.m. to text just to make sure the other was still there. Day 18, unable to sleep, I found an old Reddit thread from 2019 asking, "Who is your worst teacher?" 3 different accounts mentioned Miss Brown by name, describing her mind games and how she'd pick one student each year to torment. The thread was deleted, but a cached version existed. I screenshotted everything and sent it to our lawyer. Day 19, the school board meeting devolved into chaos, parents screaming at each other across the auditorium. Half demanded Miss Brown's immediate arrest, the other half claimed she was a scapegoat. Ben's dad, despite having withdrawn from the lawsuit, stood up and shouted that she nearly got them all killed. Security cleared the room while people shoved each other in the parking lot. Daniel's mom filed for a restraining order after Miss Brown's supporters began taking pictures of our front doors and posting them online with our addresses. The judge denied it, stating that without direct threats, it was free speech. At night around 3:00 a.m., something snapped inside me. I pulled up the released audio recordings from that day, syncing Miss Brown's words with the gunshots in the background. I set up my phone and started reading from the transcript. I didn't approve any lockdown drill today. Bang. Sit down or you're all getting zeros. Bang, bang. My hands shook, but I continued through every word she said while kids were dying. I posted the video to TikTok at 4:17 a.m. By noon, it had 2 million views. Other students began making their own videos showing what their teachers did correctly. Mrs. Garcia got everyone under desks in 8 seconds. Mr. Peterson had his class in a storage closet before the second announcement. Coach Williams carried 2 frozen freshmen into an equipment room. Every teacher except Miss Brown had their students hidden within 30 seconds. Hashtags like Teachers Save and Brown Chose Control exploded across platforms. That night, Tyler showed up at my house unexpectedly after a panic attack. We sat in my driveway until sunrise, sharing earbuds and listening to old playlists from before everything changed. He kept whispering, "We're okay," like a prayer. Next morning, the district attorney announced 23 counts of reckless endangerment of a minor, 1 for each student in our class. Miss Brown turned herself in wearing a navy suit with her teaching awards pinned to her jacket like medals. Cameras captured her walking up the courthouse steps, chin high, a slight smile on her face. Her bail was set at $50,000. Her supporters had a GoFundMe running before she was even processed, raising the full amount in 2 hours and 17 minutes. She walked out of the courthouse still smiling, stopping in front of cameras to talk about vindication and control. Mom had to physically drag me back to the car. The victims' families began meeting at the community center on Wednesdays, but I couldn't bring myself to go. Mom attended instead, returning each time with puffy eyes, just holding me tightly without words. Ben texted me a photo of Jake Wilson's junior year essay covered in Miss Brown's red pen. The notes were brutal, criticizing lazy thinking and disappointing effort. At the bottom, in her perfect handwriting, she had written about discussing his future in her course. Detective Santos called the next day, saying they'd found 6 more complaints against Miss Brown spanning 15 years, all from male students mentioning psychological manipulation. Every complaint was dropped after closed-door meetings. Principal Foster resigned at an unexpected emergency press conference, admitting he had failed us, that Miss Brown should have been removed years ago, but he chose the easy path. 2 days later, Miss Brown's lawyer filed a $5 million countersuit against the school district, claiming they were scapegoating her for their own security failures. I laughed out loud at the audacity when I saw the news alert in my therapist's waiting room. The next day, Rebecca called a meeting at the community center. All 23 families attended. She explained we weren't just defending ourselves anymore, we were filing criminal complaints with the state board and launching a federal civil rights lawsuit. Parents signed papers and exchanged numbers. At night, unable to sleep, I began writing everything down in an old notebook. Every word Miss Brown said during those 47 minutes, how she blocked the light switch, threatened us with zeros and expulsion while gunshots drew closer. Dr. Patel said writing helps process trauma, but it felt more like building a case. 3 days later, a website called Survivors of Room 203 appeared, with 37 testimonies pouring in from former students over 10 years, all describing the same tactics: public humiliation, shifting rules, mind games designed to breed self-doubt. The pattern was undeniable. A local reporter interviewed me. My hands shook when the camera rolled, but I kept my voice steady, describing how she looked at us while gunshots echoed and chose her authority over our lives. The segment aired that evening, and my phone didn't stop buzzing for hours. Ben surprised everyone by posting his own story on Instagram, despite his parents' objections. He wrote about almost staying seated because he feared Miss Brown's punishment more than death. He said, "I saved his life by defying her." Within 3 hours, his post had 10,000 shares. An FBI agent called my parents with new information. Jake had texted a friend the night before the shooting about Miss Brown destroying him. The friend had deleted the messages, but investigators recovered them. The texts were explicit about his plans and his specific hatred for her. 2 days later, news broke that Miss Brown's husband had filed for divorce and moved out overnight. Court documents showed he'd been planning it for months, but the shooting accelerated his timeline. Even her own husband was abandoning her. I returned to school briefly to collect my things. Room 203 remained sealed with crime scene tape. The hallway felt wrong, smelling of industrial cleaner masking something else. I grabbed my belongings from my locker as fast as I could while Tyler waited in the running car outside. The prosecution brought in an expert, Dr. Catherine Mills, who specialized in crisis response. After 3 days of review, her conclusion was brutal. Miss Brown violated every established protocol, showing gross negligence that directly endangered our lives. Miss Brown's supporters organized a rally at the courthouse, which turned disastrous when parents of the 2 deceased students arrived as counter-protesters. When someone yelled that Brown did nothing wrong, one of the mothers collapsed sobbing on the courthouse steps. The photo went viral instantly, depicting our town utterly divided. News vans from 3 states away arrived. Tyler's mom organized a support group where the 23 of us gathered in a circle of folding chairs. A girl from Mr. Peterson's class twisted her hair as she described how their teacher immediately flipped desks to make a barrier. Another kid from the science wing told of being pulled into a chemical storage room, the door blocked with a filing cabinet. Everyone had the same story except us. Their teachers protected them. Ours tried to get us killed. One girl looked at me and said, "We shouldn't have had to save ourselves." Everyone nodded. The State Board of Education finally launched an investigation on day 35 after intense media pressure. Rebecca called to say they were subpoenaing 10 years of district records. Investigators found 17 formal complaints against Miss Brown that were never properly documented. Criminal charges against the administrators who covered for her were now possible. Mom arranged dinner with Tyler's family. We all pushed food around our plates. Tyler's dad tried to talk about college plans, but the words hung heavily in the air. His mom mentioned summer vacation ideas, but stopped mid-sentence when a car backfired outside and we all jumped. We were all pretending we weren't permanently altered, that loud noises didn't paralyze us, that shadows didn't make our hearts race. On day 40, I found myself at the state capitol with a microphone, facing a legislative committee and 300 people. I read from a prepared statement, telling them Miss Brown weaponized her authority while a weapon was in our school, that she chose her ego over our lives, and asking how many complaints it takes before someone acts. The representative simply stared when I finished. 2 days later, a custodian named Frank contacted our lawyer with crucial evidence, forgotten security footage from 3 years ago, from an old camera system never disconnected. It showed Jake leaving Miss Brown's classroom in tears before punching a wall so hard his knuckles bled. The timestamp matched the day he filed his complaint. The original investigation had never checked the old system. Ben's family called on day 42 to say they were rejoining the lawsuit. His dad's company mysteriously got all its contracts back the same day the FBI began investigating Miss Brown's brother-in-law for witness tampering. His dad said some things are more important than money. We all knew the truth. The brother-in-law backed down when federal agents appeared at his office. The grand jury met the next week and upgraded Miss Brown's charges to attempted murder through depraved indifference. Her lawyer called it prosecutorial overreach, but the DA held a press conference explaining that keeping children exposed during an active shooter showed extreme disregard for human life. Legal experts said this charge might set a new precedent. Tyler received his early admission to State University on day 45, but called to defer for a gap year. He came over that night and explained he couldn't leave me to face the trial alone. We both knew our connection wasn't normal teenage romance anymore. It was forged in shared survival. Day 47 was my first good day since the shooting. I went 6 hours without thinking about it while helping Mom reorganize the garage. Then guilt slammed into me like a truck. How could I forget, even for a minute, when 2 kids were dead? Dr. Patel said healing isn't linear, but it felt like a betrayal. The state board held its hearing on day 50 to revoke Miss Brown's teaching license. She appeared in a black suit, calling it a lynching of a dedicated educator. When they showed testimonials from 37 former students, she labeled them weak children who couldn't handle high standards. Several board members recoiled. She yelled about cancel culture before they voted unanimously to revoke her license permanently and referred the case to the Attorney General for additional child endangerment charges spanning her career. Next week's blurred into legal meetings and therapy sessions until Detective Santos called on day 52 with news that made me drop my phone. Digging through old personnel files, she found a sealed folder from 2009 about Miss Brown's transfer from Westfield High. A student there had attempted suicide, leaving a 3-page note specifically naming Miss Brown for daily humiliation and mind games. School quietly transferred Miss Brown to our district rather than investigate because the superintendent's wife was her cousin. Within hours of this leak, a Facebook group called Survivors of Patricia Brown had 200 members, with stories spanning 25 years and 3 schools, all describing the same pattern of public shaming, gaslighting, and protection by compliant administrators. 2 days later, Mom drove me to meet the Johnsons and the Garshes, whose children, Michael and Sophia, had died because they stayed at their desks following Miss Brown's orders. Mrs. Johnson held my hand, tears streaming, saying she didn't blame us survivors. Mr. Garsh's voice broke as he said, "You fought to save yourselves while our children never got the chance because they followed the rules." We sat in their living room crying together, looking at photos of Michael and Sophia at prom just 3 weeks before they died. Rebecca called that afternoon with prosecution updates that sent me running to the bathroom, sick. They had evidence Miss Brown knew Jake was likely targeting her based on previous confrontations, yet she deliberately kept us exposed as a form of psychological torture. The prosecutors would argue she used us as human shields for her ego, preferring to risk our lives than admit she was wrong about the lockdown. The truth was more horrifying than we imagined. By day 56, the school district's lawyers panicked and offered a $30 million settlement divided among the families, admitting no wrongdoing but acknowledging failures. Some families accepted, unable to afford prolonged legal battles, but my parents and 12 others held out for criminal justice, not just money. 2 days later, Tyler took me to the memorial that had grown outside the school, hundreds of flowers, teddy bears, and photos. Someone had left a copy of the student handbook with lockdown procedures highlighted, a note attached reading, "These rules save lives when teachers follow them." We stood holding hands, reading messages, when Tyler squeezed my fingers hard. Between 2 bouquets was a printed copy of Jake's manifesto, 5 pages detailing Miss Brown's methods like a psychological torture manual, with every incident verified by the FBI through former student interviews. That same week, Miss Brown's former teaching assistant from 2015 broke her silence in a news interview. She had quit after 1 semester, unable to watch her treatment of students, and had reported it to Principal Foster. Nothing was done because of tenure and union protection, another adult who chose the easy path. Ben's deposition happened on day 62. His voice never wavered as he stated, "Miss Brown taught us that authority was more important than safety. But that day, I taught everyone that survival is the only thing that matters." When asked if he blamed me for defying her, Ben said I was the only adult in that room who acted like one, that a 17-year-old girl showed more leadership than a woman with 25 years of experience. The FBI arrested Miss Brown's brother-in-law the next morning for witness tampering and obstruction of justice after catching him on a wiretap threatening Ben's dad's business partners. Her support network crumbled as people saw the lengths she'd gone to, hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on students' families, using familial connections to pressure witnesses. 2 weeks later, I sat with Rebecca and the prosecutor at our kitchen table, drafting my victim impact statement. She told me not to hold back. Tyler sat beside me, his hand on my knee as I wrote about being kept at our desks while a shooter walked the halls. I wrote until my hand cramped, typed, then wrote more. The words were angry, then sad, then simply exhausted. Rebecca read the draft and nodded, saying it would help the jury see the truth. 2 days later, the court clerk called. The trial was set for 3 months out. I tried to return to normal SAT prep, college applications, but how do you write about future goals when you almost had no future? The Common App essay asked about a challenge overcome. I stared at the blank page for hours. Then, on day 70, Ben's text blew up my phone. Miss Brown had emailed his parents suggesting their son was confused and needed TH. Rappy to remember correctly. The prosecutor had her arrested within 2 hours. News vans caught her being led out in handcuffs, yelling about persecution. The judge called an emergency hearing. I watched from the gallery as the prosecutor presented the email, proving Miss Brown had violated her bail by contacting witnesses. The judge revoked her bail immediately. As court officers approached, she stood quickly, knocking over a water glass. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes as they cuffed her. She looked directly at me as she was led past, and I could see the realization hit her. She was no longer in control. 2 nights later, Mom found me at the kitchen table at 3:00 a.m., surrounded by college essay drafts. My Common App essay was about the day I chose to survive despite my teacher's orders. Mom read over my shoulder and said I didn't have to write about this if it was too hard. I told her I did, because this was who I was now. We both knew I'd never be the person I was before. The trial began 3 months later on a cold Monday morning. The prosecutor's opening statement included playing audio from my phone, shots growing closer, students crying, Miss Brown's voice clear, calling us hysterical. Several jurors covered their mouths. Miss Brown sat at the defense table in a gray suit, still playing the victim. The next day, I testified for 4 hours. The prosecutor walked me through every second. Her lawyer tried to paint me as a rebellious kid who disliked authority, but I stayed calm, repeating facts. When he asked why I defied a direct order, I looked at the jury and said, I chose to live while she chose her ego. The courtroom fell silent for 10 seconds. On day 3, Tyler testified, his voice cracking as he described getting my texts, hiding in that closet, and the moment he thought I was dead because I stopped responding. Miss Brown's lawyer objected, calling it emotional manipulation, but the judge said the jury needed to understand the trauma. Day 4 changed everything. Enhanced audio from the security footage revealed at timestamp 9:47 a.m. Miss Brown's voice crystal clear. If this is real, they deserve what they get for not respecting me. A juror gasped. Even her own lawyer looked stunned. The judge called a recess as parents in the gallery erupted. Day 5, Miss Brown testified against her lawyer's advice. She insisted she maintained perfect order, that we were never in real danger, that she was being persecuted for having standards. The prosecutor let her talk, then asked one question that silenced the room. Did you recognize Jake Wilson's voice when he was in the hallway outside your classroom? Miss Brown froze, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. After 15 seconds, she whispered, yes. The courtroom exploded. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. When order was restored, the prosecutor walked up to her and asked the unbearable question. Did you know it was Jake Wilson in that hallway? The same Jake Wilson who filed 3 complaints against you? Miss Brown's hand shook, her face draining of color. Finally, she cracked, yelling about how Jake needed to learn respect, just like all of us. A juror in the back row began to cry. 3 weeks later, we returned for the verdict. The tension was electric. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found her guilty on all counts, 23 counts of endangering children, plus depraved indifference. Miss Brown collapsed into her chair, looking scared for the first time. The judge said she could face up to 25 years. Families of the deceased sobbed. 2 weeks after that, I read my victim impact statement at sentencing. My hands were slick with sweat, but I made myself look at her. I told her she taught me that authority without wisdom is dangerous, that control without care is mere cruelty. I said I would carry those 47 minutes forever, but she would have to carry what she chose to do. The judge sentenced her to 18 years, eligible for parole after 12. As guards handcuffed her, she turned to us and said she was just keeping standards. Even then, she didn't understand. And that was perhaps the worst part of all. A month later, Tyler and I sat in his car watching workers install new metal detectors and cameras at the school. We were different now, bound by what happened, but also changed inside. Tyler took my hand and said, "We survived." This time, it wasn't a question. Ben addressed the school board that spring, giving a powerful speech about reforming how teacher complaints are handled. His voice was strong, nothing like the scared kid who almost stayed seated. No student should have to choose between their grades and staying alive, he declared. I started at State University that fall studying education policy. For a few weeks, my roommate didn't know my history, and I was just Brianna, not the shooting girl. It felt good, yet strange, to keep that enormity inside. In November, they reopened room 203 as a memorial classroom and asked me to speak at the ceremony. Standing where Miss Brown once stood felt surreal. I told everyone that protecting kids isn't just about locks and drills, it's about listening when they say something is wrong. Mom drove me home for winter break. We passed the school where kids played basketball as if nothing had ever happened there. I remarked they looked so young. Mom said we all did back then. We both knew I'd never be that young again. Innocence was another casualty of that day. Tyler and I met at our old coffee shop during the holidays. We still checked the exits and jumped at sudden noises, but we were learning to live with it. Tyler held my hand and said we were writing new chapters now, a bit cheesy, but true. The scars would always be there, but we were more than what happened in room 203. We were the kids who refused to stay in our seats when standing up meant staying alive.